Good afternoon. Today's video is going to be about multi-start threading on a lathe, a metal lathe. So I use two lathes. I use a vintage Craftsman Atlas 1960s 12-inch lathe with imperial threading, and I use a vintage American-made South Bend 10K with imperial threads. All my threads are imperial. I can do metric, but I have to use the imperial scale that coincides with that metric thread. Like I'll thread for my sections, which are mostly metric threads, but I can use an imperial thread that will work in that instance. Multiple threads are not as hard as you may think, and I'm going to show you a technique that I've combined from two different techniques to create this technique that you can thread multiple threads on pretty much every pen you have. I haven't seen one that I haven't been able to do it on, so just stay tuned and we'll get right into it. Okay? Thanks. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is to give some shout outs to the people that deserve the shout outs. The first one is to Mr. Pete, or AKA Tubal Cane, and he is really an amazing, look at how many subscribers he's got here. He's an amazing machinist that has several different types of American vintage lathes, and he has several different videos on how to repair, how to clean, how to run the lathe, how to make certain things. So I have learned a lot from this guy over the last 8 to 10 years, and if you're smart, you'll check him out and you will learn a lot yourself. The second guy is this guy. This is the method that I use that he taught, and he calls it the best threading on a manual lathe best technique ever. And his name is Joe Pye, and here is the technique right here. If you see it on YouTube, you need to check it out because it's a great method. And I'll show you it at my lathe when we're done here. The third guy is my buddy and fellow pen maker, Jim Hines. Jim is a good teacher, and he has been making pens for many years. And he makes a lot of pens, and he does them all by hand using the same type of machinery that I use. Jim is from Texas, and you can give him a shout out. Look at his videos. I think he's on Instagram as Hines Pen Company, and you can also find him on Facebook as Jim Hines or Hines Pen Company. But he's a great resource, and he's a very good teacher because he's very good with people. And those are my shout outs, and we'll move on. All right, everyone. What you see before you here is the actual Popular Mechanics circa 1940s article on using your thread dial on your lathe to create multi-start threads. So basically, the article goes into pretty good detail on how to use your thread dial to split the leads to create your multi-start threads. I won't get into it too much because I'm going to actually show you how to do it, but if anyone is interested in getting this, let me know, and I could either direct you to where to find it on the internet, or I can just send you a picture of this. But it was really neat, and it's kind of cool to have. All right, so let's first talk about what is a multi-thread. A multi-thread is multiple intertwined threads that run parallel along the length of a threaded surface. So it's different than a single thread. A single thread is one thread. And you'll see why multi-threads are popular in pen making. If I had a cap and I had to thread this on and I had single thread, it would take a long time. And this is just a 3/8 16. And it would take a long time to thread it all the way on. You would take maybe 10 or 12 threads. And this is it's a coarse medium thread at 16. But it would take several turns, as opposed to this, which is a 4-start 36 TPI. And here we go, 1.5. How simple that is. And you can see the advantages to that. All right, so I want to show you a little bit of the changes that I've made over the years threading multiple starts. I recently just got this pen back for a repair. Actually, it's not a repair. I have to make a new section for it. There's no repairs needed. The guy that has this pen lost the section somehow. But as you can see, this is a little bit coarser thread, and there's some differences compared to this thread. Back in those days, I was doing a 2-start thread. So this is probably a 2-start 13 TPI thread times 2 is 26. But one of the things that you'll notice is there's a small, shallow recess right here. And the reason for that is because I needed a place where I could stop my thread without running into my shoulder, and this was my safe area. So the method I'm going to show you eliminates this problem. And the current style thread that I use, as you can see, now this is a 36 TPI and this is a 4-start, so it's 9 TPI times 4. And you'll notice that there is no area where there's like a safe stop area that I use. And I'll show you why. All right, so what you see is just a little quick drawing of my blank this way and cutting the recess for the threads. And this is what would look like if we're looking down the barrel of it. I only am saying this because this is the way that you want to keep the blank before threading it. So the major no-no that you do not want to do when threading on a lathe is to remove this from the chuck before you thread it. Because if you do, what's going to happen is something like this. You're going to thread it, and it's not going to thread like this. It's going to thread like that. And what's going to happen is you're going to have an offset. And we do not want that. We want it to be perfectly in line with each other. Look, it's mechanics, it's physics. I don't know what it is, but don't do it. Unless you think that you can, but I've never been successful, and a lot of other people I know have not been successful. So biggest thing is to not remove your blanks from your lathe chuck until you have completed all the threading on each pieces. All right, so we are going to thread this cap and barrel. This is the largest pen size that I make. It's kind of sort of like an emperor size pen, and the thread is 5/8 in diameter, and it's a 36 TPI 4-start. So in order for me to make that work, my barrel, my external thread has to be at 0.6250. Now I can fudge a few thousandths either way to still get a good fit, but I want to be close to that number as possible. For my internal thread or my cap, I want to be at this number, 5950. Again, a few thousandths either way, but I want to be as close as possible. Now I do all my threading to fit. So basically, I usually start with the barrel, and I thread the barrel, and then I have barrels that I use as my tester barrels, and I'll thread that on to see if I get a good fit. And I have them in all of the sizes that I make, 1/2 inch, 9/16, and 5/8. So then I usually will get a good fit. I don't use in-thread wires, and I don't get too technical on that. I think most pen makers probably do the same. But the most important thing is to get a good, smooth fit, not too loose and not very tight. Then it'll give you too many problems. All right, so what you see before you is a tap and die. And these are not multi-start thread taps or dies. These are just some old taps. But I wanted to show you. And I wanted to let you know that or explain to you what the benefit of being able to thread on the lathe will give you. So what I'm about to show you is two different size pens here. This one has a 9/16 diameter thread, and this one is 5/8. That's the advantage in a nutshell. If I'm using, unless I have several different styles of tap and dies, I am going to have to make every size pen with this same diameter thread. And these multi-start tap and dies are not cheap. I think you can get a set for $300 or $400. I'm not sure anymore, but that's what they cost back when I had one back in like 2012. So you're pretty much stuck on making that size thread for every pen that you make. So let's say that you wanted to make, or somebody asked you, hey, can you make me an emperor size pen? But you only have the thread to do something equal to a 9/16. So basically what you would have to do is you would have this big barrel, and then you would have to come way in to do your thread, and it would look pretty unsightly. So threading on the lathe gives you the ability to create a larger threaded surface. All right, so let's show you how this is going to work. Before you, what you see is a vintage Atlas Craftsman thread dial. This one goes on my 12-inch, but it also works on a 10-inch. And what you see is the two numbers and the two hash marks, basically breaking this up into fours. And the reason that they do this is that if you're threading and you're threading an even number of threads, because basically most imperial threads, let's say you're doing 3/8/16 or 24 or, you know, 1/2-inch 20. If you're threading that thread, you can start on any one of these lines. That changes, though, when you go to an odd number. And how does that change? Well, what you have here now is that you'll be able to hit 1 or 2, or this hash mark or this hash mark. You can't hit 1 in the hash mark because then you're going to get 2 leads. And that's important to note when doing multi-start threads. So for multi-start threads using the thread dial, it is better to use multiples of an odd number. So let's say that I was doing a 2-start thread and it was a 26 TPI thread. My first lead would be on the number 1, and that would create my first thread line. My second lead would have to be on the hash mark, because if I went to 2, I would still be hitting the same lead as number 1. So my second lead would have to be on one of these hash marks, and that would create my 2-start thread. Does that make sense? We're going to go into a little bit deeper in just a second. All right, so here is how we're going to do a 4-start thread. If you remember from the last clip, 1, 2. But now we're going to make 4 starts. So how do we do that? We split the leads between the 1 and the 2. So just like before, your first thread would be at number 1, and your second thread would be at number 2. And I'm using a 9 TPI. So I'm going to end up with 36 threads, 36 TPI threads. So my third lead would be splitting between the number 1 and 2. And you would split it right here between the 1 and the first hash mark. And then my fourth lead would be between that middle hash mark and the 2. And that would be my fourth lead. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. And that creates 4 individual thread leads. Now that's for this dial. The article will show you how to do it on your specific dial based on the type of dial that you have. But on the Craftsman Atlas dial, this is how you would do it. All right, so let's take a look at my lathe, my individual lathe. It's a Craftsman Atlas 12-inch lathe. It's got a long bed, but I like it long. I know I'm making just a pen, but I can actually move that stock out of the way, and you know, if I want to move this carriage out of the way, it's more convenient for me. And I have it up pretty high because I'm 6'4" and tall, so it really makes perfect sense for me. And again, this is an imperial lathe, so these are the threads that it cuts. So how you find your thread, basically, it's a cross-reference. So let's say you're doing 9 threads. So you're going to put your one lever here that coincides with the 9, and then it says you want to put your second lever on A. So the next lever would be on A. So this is where it's going to be to cut our 36 TPI. Now you know that makes sense because what we're doing is we're splitting leads. We're creating a single lead 4 separate times and an equal distance apart. Over here is the thread dial. Now this is a different thread dial, and this is one that I've actually, let me see if I can get this in. Okay, now you see it better. I've actually engraved the lines exactly where I need to hit for my 3rd lead and my 4th lead. So this is absolutely exactly dead center between our 2nd lead, here's our 3rd lead, and then our 4th lead. All right? So if you're not familiar with certain lathes, I do all my threading in what is called a back gear. Now, if I were to start my lathe right now and try to thread it, I would be threading this fast. That's pretty fast. You don't want to thread that fast. So basically, in order to thread, and you want to thread it at a slower speed, what you have to do is you have to take it and put it in the back gear. I don't know why they created this like this, but it's really inconvenient, but you have to pull this out, and what that does is that frees up the spindle from the actual, it actually frees up the pulley from the spindle. And then there's a couple of levers that you want to throw. One, you want to throw the back gear lever, and that's this one. It pulls out and pushes in. Then you want to engage the gearbox. So I'm threading backwards, and we're going to get into that really quick. But there's the 2 ways that you can do this. This is your neutral. This is forward. This is backwards. Okay? And that's important to note if you're going to thread backwards like I do, or in reverse. I call it backwards, but actually I'm threading from the base of my thread outward. Okay, that's important to note. Okay, so it's all set up to do the threading, and I've got my belt on the slowest speed pulley. So I can now close the lid, and all I have to do now is prepare my blank for threading. Now I've already taken the liberty to dimension this blank, and this is about, I think I'm just about at 0.6255, maybe a little bit smaller than that, but well within the minimum maximum, diameter that I would need. All right. Now, if we were threading towards our work, we would use a typical 60-degree threading tool, but we are not doing that. We are threading away from the work. Again, we're threading in reverse. So what I have found that makes it easier for me is an internal thread bar is the best one to use for my external threads. And let me see if I can get a better, there you go, better focus, sorry. So this is what I use to thread my external threads with. Now, to thread my internals, I use a left-handed, same type, but it's called a left-handed threaded bar. And these are the two threading tools that I use to create my barrel, cap and barrel threads. And I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so when threading backwards, the most important thing is to return back to the same spot every time, or threading in reverse. And that's when this comes in to play. This right here is a stop. I had it custom made for me by a friend, and it works amazing. Basically, it is a stop that I can adjust so I can hit the same spot every time. And they're not hard to get. You can find Atlas Craftsman lathe stops on eBay for pretty cheap. But what this does, though, is it gives me the ability to fine-tune exactly where I want to place my tool and where I want it to stop. As you can see, I've got it right up against that small shoulder there. So that's exactly where I can start my thread. However, though, I don't want to hit this shoulder, so what I'll do is I'll push it out a little bit, a few thousandths, and then when I start my thread, it won't come in contact with that shoulder. Okay? Okay, so now you see that the tool is in behind the piece, and that's how we're going to thread the external threads. And basically you want to start by zeroing out. So I've just touched my tool to the piece, and over at my lathe I've zeroed it out, and that's where we'll start. Alright, once you have your dial set at 0 and it's touching your material, you want to do your first 4 leads at the same measurement each time. And then as you deepen your thread and as you go along in this process, you want to, each time you do, you want to go in just a little bit, a few hundred thousandths at a time. Because basically you're only going to go to about 24 thousandths deep when you're making, for this particular thread, you're going to go 24 thousandths roughly. So you only want to go a few hundred thousandths at a time. So basically what I always do is I kind of split. So like I say, this is the 0 and this is your 5 mark. I'll split, this is, 200 thousandths or, 500 thousandths or 750 thousandths or, and I could be wrong, it's not hundreds of thousands, it's just 20 thousandths. But basically, I'm getting to the point where I'm running each line, each thread, the same place each time as I keep pulling deeper into the material to create that thread, which is about 24 thousandths. All right, does that make sense? Okay. All right, it's a little loud, but you can see the rotation is going this way, that way, not coming towards us. So we know that that's going backwards. But to make sure, what you can do is you can take your thread dial and you can hit it, and to make sure that your lathe carriage is going in the right direction and it's going away from your material. All right? There you know that you're going in the right direction. All right, so I completed the external thread. I didn't want to show you every round of, threading the leads because it's a little boring, but you get the idea. You come in a little deeper each time. You do a round of threads, and you get to a certain point where you think, hey, I'm going to try a test fit. So you have to have something that you use as your test fitting piece. And here is mine. And perfect fit right there. Also, a good thing to have on hand is one of these, so you can look at your threads and you can see if they're nice and clean and they're all uniform. And I've already done that here, and they are nice, clean, and uniform. Now, you don't want your threads completely sharp to a point because you could curl them over and make them unsightly. You want it to maybe just a small squared off top where it looks pretty decent, because it's just they seem to fit better when they're like that. If you make them too sharp, like I said, they could bend over eventually, and they could be very difficult to clean up in the end. All right, so now I have the cap inside here, and I've bored it and it's ready to thread. I've got the left-handed internal threading bar, which is the threading tool is pointed towards the back of the blank. I've got my stop set where I want it, and I am ready to start doing the internal threads on the cap. I'm sorry, not barrel. All right. All right, so now it's time for the test. The thread's good in there. Nice and smooth. Perfect thread. It's ready to come out. Okay, here we are. And look at those threads and the internal threads. Now I did a little relief on the inside, like I always do, but clean, and let's see how they work. Very little play, smooth, and concentric. So I was successful in threading a cap and barrel, and that's what it's all about. All right, guys, see me on the next one.